Sawan, thank you. Sawan is the co-founder and co-director of Justice Now, and Dima is the co-founder and executive director. So they will be telling you all about their work, and they will be introducing their research throughout today. I will just briefly introduce who we are, Trust Consultancy and Development, for those that maybe never joined one of our events. So we're an independent monitoring and evaluation agency based in Gaziantep, Turkey, but we also have satellite offices in Pakistan and Palestine. Trust was founded in 2016 by Syrian humanitarians. One of the co-founders, Yusuf Al-Mustafa, is our Trust CEO to this day. We have worked in many different countries, many different contexts, and have partnerships across the globe, but most of our assignments do develop in the Middle Eastern region. To this day, we have conducted over 180 third-party monitoring assignments. I think we are at a little bit above 190, around 193. So in order to successfully complete these assignments, we have completed thousands of data collection tasks, both in quantitative and qualitative data collections. As you can see in the slide, we operate through surveys, observations, key informant interviews, focus group discussions, and in-depth interviews. We have also completed around 130 trainings to keep our staff up to date with the developments both in the field and in the region. And in addition, we do have public events such as today, that it's great to contribute to discussions and debates that are rising in the field of third-party monitoring and evaluation. So welcome to everyone who is joining. I think I can give you a little overview of what today is going to look like. We are going to start with a half-an-hour presentation from Sawan and Dima, who are going to present Justice Now for those who just joined. And then this will be followed by around a 25 minutes Q&A that I will facilitate, both with questions from myself, but it would be lovely to hear from you. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat box, and I will make sure it reaches the speakers, and we will address as many questions as we can. So without further ado, I will pass my word to the speakers.
Thank you, Eleonora. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the organizers of this webinar. I'd also like to thank everybody who joined us today. Hello, everyone. So my name is Dima. I am the co-founder and executive director of Justice Now. We are a grassroots organization dedicated to advocating for a holistic approach to justice within the KRG, particularly through the use of digital tools. Our beginning started as a club in our university, and it was during this time that we recognized the unique challenges people from this region endure, especially women and other marginalized groups, which encouraged us to take action. My presentation today, which I will share right now, is titled The Forgotten Women, Empowering Kurdish Women in Conflict, Peace and Governance. Today, I will focus on the last decade, particularly the role of women in the post-ISIS period. This period marked a dramatic shift in Kurdistan's landscape, not only in terms of the physical destruction, but also in the reshaping of power structures and societal roles. I will start by presenting the brave Kurdish female fighters and explaining their post-conflict situation. So as with many post-conflict regions, the aftermath in Bashur, which is the Kurdish region of Iraq, sidelined some of the very people who fought to protect it. That is, the women who stood on the front lines. Kurdish women, particularly those in the Peshmerga, have always existed and fought alongside men before ISIS. They served valiantly on the front lines, participated in key military operations. Additionally, the Azid Khan Women's Units, which you could see on the top right corner of the presentation, emerged in 2015 as a response to enslavement and massacre the Yazidi people experienced under ISIS. Their participation in the conflict was very personal. It was a profound act of survival and defiance, a reclaiming of their dignity and agency in the face of horrors. I included a map for anybody who's not very familiar with the geography of the region. There are two very strategic regions that the Kurdish fighters helped secure. One of them is the Mosul Dam area. Their involvement was crucial in recapturing that area, where 10 female Peshmerga remained to safeguard the vital infrastructure. The dam controls water and electricity for much of northern Iraq, and its destruction could have resulted in catastrophic flooding. It's actually categorized as one of the most dangerous dams in the world, and it was crucial to secure it. Another very strategic area that Kurdish female fighters helped secure was Kirkuk. It's an economically significant area, rich in resources, that holds importance for both the KRG as well as the central government. So it's really interesting because instead of being recognized as key contributors in the fight of ISIS and awarded, instead they were turned to just symbols of victory. They were publicly celebrated and used to project a narrative of progressiveness and feminism externally, but those women were sidelined internally. However, the conversation today transcends the issue of women's absence in peace talks. It highlights the dissonance between the showcase narrative of women's empowerment and the reality of their participation in the KRG. So now I want to present this illusion of women liberation that the KRG constantly preaches. It's this dynamic of using women's labor as a progressive narrative in the KRG, while they remain underrepresented in decision-making. It reminds me of what Arundhati Roy, the Indian author, discusses on how capitalism often co-opts the movements it claims to support, turning them into tools for their own goals. And isn't that exactly what we're seeing here? The image of empowered women fighters is leveraged to sell a progressive narrative, both locally and internationally. It's a convenient story for politicians and governments eager to appear feminist or forward-thinking, especially when the world is watching. But when the cameras are off, we see that the empowerment fades. We have to ask ourselves in this situation, what good is empowerment on the battlefield if it doesn't translate to real power at the table? Yes, women are called upon in times of war, but the moment peace returns, so does the patriarchy. These women are no longer seen as leaders or decision makers. They're pushed back into their margins, back into roles set by traditional patriarchal norms. But this narrative was not the first nor the last time that we see the KRG fail in representing women at the most crucial times. The picture in front of us is a picture from the Human Rights Club, the Human Rights Action Plan, in which we participated as youth activists. Just a little bit of backstory. We partnered with the UK consulate when we had our club, and we hosted a networking event connecting young activists and professionals in the human rights field. And this led to an introduction to UNAMI's senior women's protection officer, who kindly invited us to contribute to the Human Rights Action Plan. So to refocus the discussion on the action plan, Section 7 specifically addresses ISIS survivors. It aims to provide reparations, rehabilitations, and protection for women who endured unimaginable atrocities. However, despite these well-intentioned laws, implementations have fallen short, leaving the needs of these women largely unaddressed. Yazidi women, the primary survivors of ISIS brutality, were not included on the table for this plan. How can you design laws that are supposed to help survivors without involving them in the process? This is a crucial question that we also need to ask is, what does justice mean if it excludes the very people it aims to help. Now, I have to say that the discussions following the inaugural event did include quote-unquote Yazidi representatives, but we still believe that it's not at the capacity in which it proves impactful. We often see the government use cryptic language of who is joining, but it is time to see survivors and young people have seats at these tables, leading the change and discussions on policies that deeply impact their lives. And we saw this firsthand when we hosted the UK consulate at our university. We created a panel discussion for young people to address the consulate to see how they're lobbying for better laws for Yazidi people. And we put the Yazidi students at the forefront of that discussion. They were able to advocate for their rights. And we saw that encouraging young people and young women to have a seat at the table is very beneficial. They come up with creative solutions and things that experts usually miss. And adding to that, I created this comparison, this contrast of seeing how the legal rights are in the KRG versus their social realities. So we have one of the biggest ones is the UN Resolution 1325, which Iraq has adopted in 2014 in the National Action Plan and the Regional Human Rights Action Plan. However, we rarely, and I say this as a woman in the KRG, we rarely see any implementations on the ground, due to several factors that Sawin would elaborate on in her presentation. But another one, and this is why the KRG also has this narrative of progression, which it has anti-domestic laws. So the KRG passed the anti-domestic violence law in 2012, and it also criminalized female genital mutilation. However, when we look at actual data and statistics, the UNFPA said that over 58% of women still face domestic violence in Iraq, and the Kurdish region is especially vulnerable to female genital mutilation, with 70% of specific areas, usually in rural areas, where we see FGM rampant. But another thing, which I will also elaborate on later in my slides, is the personal status law. So the personal status law is the Iraqi law that governs family dynamics, what women can inherit, the marital contracts. And we see that the KRG introduced amendments to improve those rights, to allow women for better inheritance, as well as divorce rights. But because the application, this is like where they fail, is always in the application, we see that patriarchal norms always win, and they ignore women's legal rights to divorce and inheritance, although this is still mostly rampant in rural areas, but it's still present all over Iraq. So what implications does this have on Kurdish women, especially as their role as non-state actors? At the end of the day, Kurdish women do not have a state that they could fall back on. The KRG is a semi-autonomous region. So although our laws are seemingly better, we are not immune to external influence from internal factions and Western powers, as imperialism shapes how women's rights are interpreted and implemented in the region. Kurdish women face unique challenges as non-state actors, in which the UN Resolution 1325 mandates women's inclusion in peace processes, but again, because KRG is has a semi-autonomous status, it often leaves them excluded from these international protections. And Kurdistan is always faced with threats of intervention, creating a fragile political landscape, with the government usually prioritizing political alliances over rights-based government. When we think of who bears the brunt of this shift, it's the women. And they exist in this liminal space, marginalized by both local systems and international frameworks meant to support them. One other crucial aspect is also the gender ban that we've seen recently. It restricts the use of the term gender. And this, for me, it feels like an assault on the very definition of womanhood, because you're not even able to state your gender or, your identity. And this is where real change occurs. No, sorry. So in this context, grassroots organizing becomes crucial. With external pressures increasing and restrictive policies emerging, it's vital for Kurdish women and youth to push from the ground up. This is where real change occurs within communities and through local movements that refuse to let these gains slip. Now I want to present this really important political shift that we're seeing as people living within Iraq and the KRG, is that in recent years, the KRG's landscape has taken a troubling turn. So the gender ban that I just addressed is not an isolated incident. It's part of a broader pattern of political repression on women. There's a growing concern about Baghdad's creeping influence in the Kurdish region, which poses a serious threat to women's rights, particularly with proposals like the personal status law. So although the KRG did amend the personal status law, Iraq right now is still in negotiations to lower the marriage age to 9 years old, or to even deny women inheritance, land inheritance, among other restrictions that are violations on human rights. So adding to this crisis, however, we also see a departure of international NGOs and UN missions from the Kurdish region. As global attention and funding usually shifts towards from crisis to crisis, like the ones in Ukraine and Palestine, critical gaps are left in women's rights and long-term development efforts. With these international actors pulling out, local organizations are increasingly left to advocate for silenced voices, but they face significant challenges due to the lack of funding and support. By helping women and marginalized groups access digital tools, which is a big part of our mission, we equip them to demand justice, to connect with global movements, and protect their rights in an increasingly tech-driven world. And again, in a world where global focus shifts from crisis to crisis, grassroots movements such as our own are rooted in their communities, which eventually drives lasting change. And again, this is where we step in. We empower women and communities amidst rising repression and political instability. We believe that power, real power for change, lies not in distant capitals or fleeting international programs, but with those most affected on the ground. And finally, I created this time process flow for for the shift that we're seeing and how we hope that we could, rearrange the future in a way that is equitable for women. And so first of all, I want to highlight more on the shift that we're seeing and connect it to Arundhati Roy's NGOization of resistance. She highlights how NGOs, often driven by donor agendas, focus on short-term crisis interventions, leaving deeper systemic issues of oppression and inequality unaddressed. While these organizations do important work, there's no denying that, they can sometimes miss the mark on creating lasting change. For Kurdish women, these systemic challenges are profound. Their experiences are deeply intertwined with the broader Kurdish struggle, but the impact of tribal and patriarchal structures intensifies these challenges and often exacerbates them. This dual struggle against external oppression and internal societal norms makes their fight for equality even more complex and urgent. And this is why we commit to a bottom-up approach. And this is why we choose digital tools and grassroots organizing, because we are deeply rooted in communities, in the communities we serve, and working directly with them to understand their needs and advocate for meaningful, long-lasting change. So just to conclude here, the challenges faced by women in the Kurdistan region are deeply rooted in local and global dynamics, but this reflects an experience shared by women worldwide. And by focusing on long-term community drivens, we aim to create lasting changes that transcend the limitations of short-term interventions. And real justice for Kurdish women starts with equipping them with the tools and voice to advocate for themselves. And on that note, I would like to pass it to Sawin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dima. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sawan. I am the co-founder and director of Justice Now. I will be talking more about the experiences of youth and generally drawing on our experience as well as women and youth, as well as sharing the voices of other people that have decided to share their opinion on this matter. I will shortly present my presentation. I would like to thank Dima for her insightful presentation, as well as to Trust and Eleonora for moderating this webinar. We will be exploring youth and women and how they are reshaping peace and security efforts in the Kurdistan region. I've had the privilege of witnessing the transformative impact of women and youth-led peace initiatives in various works. We've learned that intersectionality, the understanding of how overlapping identities shape our experiences isn't just a concept, it's a crucial part of achieving sustainable peace. And I would like us to take a closer look at how this plays out in our region. Before we dive in, I would like to walk you guys through the roadmap for today. We'll start by exploring the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Then we will delve into the specific challenges faced by women in the Kurdish region and examining the data and narratives that highlight the everyday realities of those affected. I'll share the voice and perspective of our youth, those living through the challenges and their hopes for a more peaceful future. We will discuss how our organization, among other local organizations, are working to break down the barriers to involve youth in more meaningful ways. And finally, I will outline actionable steps for stakeholders who would like to support and amplify this critical work. So in 2000, as was expanded upon by my colleague Dima, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 1325. This gave birth to the Women, Peace and Security agenda, aiming to bring women to the forefront of peace building and security. Despite the global support, data from the Council on Foreign Relations reveals that from 1992 to 2019, only 13% of negotiators in peace processes were women, and 70% of peace processes lacked female representation entirely. This isn't just a violation of women's rights, it's a barrier to the peace that the WPS wants to achieve. However, in our specific context, especially after ISIS, it has hindered female participation. The Kurdistan region's implementation of the second National Action Plan, guided by UN Women and local organizations, shows some progress, but challenges remain. I think it's not enough to have plans on paper. We need to understand what that looks like in practice, how local women and youth can engage and lead and shape peace on their own terms. The lessons that we learned from the region's backlash against human rights was something that we expected, as it was more of a global backlash. Despite the regional human rights action plan, including a section on women's rights, the funding and government support remains limited. The impact, though, is clear. Gender-based violence, domestic abuse, and forced marriages remain high, showing us the complexity of women's realities in the region, despite the National Action Plan, as well as the Regional Action Plan. The laws exist, but they often fail to translate into meaningful protection. What's disheartening is the backlash we've seen, like many parts of the world. Conservative groups, fearing that equality threatens cultural and religious values, have launched campaigns on social media, spreading misinformation, and has led to igniting public protests in Iraq and the KRG. It's a sobering reminder that when women rise, some will fight to keep them down. But here's the thing, I think liberation may face resistance, but it cannot be stopped. The louder they shout, the more determined women in Kurdistan will become. The key challenges that were faced, the resistance to gender equality and advocacy remains a significant challenge. Women who dare to demand their rights face not only social ostracism, but sometimes threats of violence, even from within their own families. Youth similarly struggle to have their voices heard. Their concerns are often dismissed as naive, and they lack access to platforms where they can meaningfully engage in peace and security dialogues. This marginalization isn't harmful to them, it's a loss for the entire society. We're excluding voices that could offer fresh perspectives and innovative solutions. When societies exclude women and youth from decision making, they deprive themselves of the talent, vision, and passion that these groups bring. To build a future that is inclusive and resilient, we need to shift this dynamic. When we look at the challenges of implementing the regional actions plan, we see a critical issue. Like the UNSCR 1325, the National Action Plan, and the Regional Action Plan, the primary barriers is how these plans conceptualize local women. They often treat women as a single homogeneous group, failing to recognize the diversity of their experiences. For example, a rural woman in Sharbajer may face a very different types of obstacles than a female professional in Erbil. These nuanced realities are often lost in the broad language of policy documents. This lack of understanding results in policies that are disconnected from the lived experiences of the women they're meant to help. If we don't pay attention to the intersection of factors such as ethnicity, education, and socioeconomic factors, our efforts will not yield to the desired outcomes. What the barriers that women and youth organizations face in peace projects are structural barriers when trying to engage. Access to decision-making platforms remains limited, and financial resources are scarce due to the donor restrictions that are specifically put in place for youth organizations. Many of these organizations also rely heavily on international funding, which is often unstable. Additionally, the policies that do exist to support women and youth, including those aligned with UNSCR 1325, frequently fall short in their implementation. The problem, I think, isn't a lack of policies, it's the lack of many factors that come together. For example, political will, resources, and cultural buy-in to enforce them. If we genuinely want to see change I think inviting women and youth to participate isn't enough. We must actively invest in their capacity, provide resources, and advocate for inclusive leadership models that don't just include them, but position them as leaders and see them as co-collaborators. To really see if this was true, we conducted a small survey within university students to get their responses on what they believe are the biggest security risks. We would love to share this report with anyone who is interested later on. But one small question that we present here is that what was their perspective on women's rights and peace building? They talked about domestic violence, sexual harassment, the lack of legal protection for women. But what struck me most wasn't just the answers, but it was the frustrations behind them. These young people know the problems all too well, yet they feel like no one is listening. They are ready to act, ready to advocate for change, and I think they already are. And this is where our organization would love to come in and help. Through our work, we've seen the desire of youth and women's involvement, but the opportunities are lacking. And this is why Dima and I had the idea of establishing the organization to kind of bridge this gap. But I think the emphasis should be on stronger collaboration between youth groups and civil society organizations. I think this would be the key to advancing women and youth's involvement in peace processes and initiatives, to include them from the very start as co-creators of the solutions. This means targeted trainings, discussion spaces, and using technology to amplify voices and to amplify their voices. Despite the progress, women are still underrepresented in planning and decision-making phases. To address this, we are launching several new projects aimed at empowering women and youth in the KRG, which would include an online platform tailored to the needs of women and survivors, providing accessible information and support. This idea came about to bridge the gap that Dima talked about with the policies, as well as I touched upon, to bridge the gap between the laws and the information that is available through technology. We're also organizing workshops to train young advocates in policy making, digital storytelling, and grassroots organizing. Our goal is to bridge the gap between the legal frameworks and the lived reality of women and youth. We believe that by making these investments now, we aren't just advancing gender equality, but more so laying the foundation for a more resilient and inclusive society. And thank you for being part of this conversation. I think your support is very crucial to our mission, as well as to the work that we are doing together. I think in the audience, whether you are a policymaker, NGO leader, or a community member, you have a role to play. Advocate for inclusive policies, support local women and youth-led initiatives, and help amplify the voices that are too often overlooked. I believe that together we can create a future where it is, at least when conflict does arise, we can go with this together and make sure that the qualities of justice, equality, and the opportunity is there for everybody. Let's keep working towards that vision, because sustainable peace, as we believe that it is possible, but your involvement depends on it. Thank you. And if you want to reach out to me for any further questions, my email is up there. And I would also like to give a special thanks to our mentor, Dr. Elina Jabari, who helped us for years and also with this work.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you. Yeah, maybe I can share your emails if you want with who attended today. I think it was very interesting to hear these perspectives, especially because I think we work more in this kind of international mechanisms that both conceptualize, right, like development and how these projects should be shaped, and especially trust, but maybe also other people that are here today work in more of this kind of monitoring and evaluation, right? And I think there is a common direction that maybe you have also highlighted with Resolution 1325 of wanting to include voices and perspectives that have been marginalized for a long time, and also with this localization agenda, which is very big in the field right now. But often there is a bit of this contrast with actually on the ground, there isn't the feeling that this is maybe working so well in terms of advancing these types of agenda. So I think it was very good to have this like gender perspective. I have definitely a few questions, but if anyone else has them as well, feel free to drop them in the chat, and or I mean, you can also raise your hand, I guess, and we can have like a conversation if anyone wants to. The first question that came to my mind in terms of how also monitoring and evaluating projects like plays into this, because there is this kind of, for example, in the EU, like good guidelines for third-party monitoring. They do highlight how donors are encouraged to engage with third-party monitoring and how these agencies should particularly develop innovative strategies to include women, children, and vulnerable groups in their reports. And I'm specifically referring to the Good Practices in TPM report that was published by the EU. But maybe there is a bit of a lack of methodology in terms of how you say, maybe we speak to women, but always in this kind of marginalized or second perspective. And I was wondering, because you also work in research and with communities, if you had any kind of insight in how you think, especially agencies that are not grassroots NGOs, right, but have more accountability to international structures, how maybe they could improve in these guidelines that are theoretically there.
Yes, definitely. I can answer that question. I think for when we think about engaging women, youth, and vulnerable groups, it's essential to move beyond the traditional frameworks of monitoring and evaluation. One of the most powerful approaches we've used so far is what we call empathy-based monitoring, which is drawing on from what Dima said in her presentation. I think the focus of many also governments, the focus is simply on collecting data. I think we need to create spaces where women feel safe enough to share their stories. In one of our projects, we introduced monitoring and evaluation sessions using storytelling and drawing as tools to allow women, and the drawing is specifically tailored towards youth, to express themselves. I think these creative methods would allow us to tap into their experiences in ways that traditional surveys or focus groups couldn't. I think that it allows us to learn about their fears, their hopes, and the barriers that they face daily. And I think third-party monitoring agencies can employ more of a participatory approach that directly involve women and youth in the data collection process. But for us, I think one thing that we did was to send trained female monitors directly into communities. So those were women who understand say, like the local culture there, to gather insights in a private, like one-on-one setting. And we thought of this because we knew that many women wouldn't feel very comfortable, especially on certain subjects, to openly speak in front of their community or even in front of other people. So by having a women-led team, we ensure their voices are heard. And I think the focus that we have is also we shifted away more from data, and we focused on showing the women that we were interacting with that their perspectives were really valuable to us from the very start of the project.
Yeah, I really agree with what you said. It's because usually a lot of organizations focus so much on numbers and achieving a certain goal. And when you do this empathy-based monitoring, you really get to see the intersectional aspect of women's lives in marginalized communities because they are more vulnerable and susceptible to different challenges. And sometimes people cannot weigh in on the different barriers that women have in certain societies. And I think, Sawan, like what you said about trust, it's also very important because it's so hard to allow women to truly trust other parties, especially when there has been so much harm done to them by whether it's organizations unintentionally by not advocating for them properly. So I think the key is localization, is sending female monitors from that community to speak to the community itself to gain their trust, or as we usually do, through anonymity by using the internet, which is much safer, especially when talking about very sensitive conversations.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for those insights. Maybe Tahar has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yes, my name is Zahar. I work for a French agency called Expertise France. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was extremely insightful. I have two main questions. One is you do a very interesting assessment of the current situation of women within the KRG. I was wondering if you could put that in perspective, like if you compare to 5 years ago or 10 years ago, do you feel like there is a dynamic towards better, or on the contrary, including if you think of what is happening now in federal Iraq with the personal status law, if you feel that there is a more of a conservative wave coming forward. So just try to understand what's the dynamic there. And within the same question, I would say, what is your perception of how the topic of women inclusiveness and empowerment was treated during the elections recently? Do you feel like this is something that was treated by candidates altogether, or that was completely ignored by the public and by also by the political parties? Thank you so much.
I think I can answer more on the parliament, and then if Dima, you want to, you could elaborate on the first question. Yeah, for the elections, I think what we saw, we have this. I mean, from the frame of the digital medias and the news agencies, they really did focus on having quota, because we have a quota system of a certain specific number, 30% has to be women. And I think this is an issue, again, because the focus goes back on the number of women and not the inclusion of issues that women would really care about. And then one of the biggest agencies highlights that certain women are in the parliament because of the quota system. I think this takes it away because the 4 candidates that got in, they got a lot of votes. But I think how the framework works of the female candidates, it depends on the political ideology of the certain political party that they follow. So if they're a candidate for a certain political party, then they would advocate within the framework or within the policies that the political party is pursuing. And then it would be different from one to another. I think, though, the underlying sentiment from what we realize, at least in our city, there is a growing dissatisfaction despite the elections being there. But I think people are dissatisfied with how things are going. And I think that one of the issues is for women as well is that when there is a women representative, the issues of women get sidelined again because of the politics that are ongoing. So yeah, I think this would be my analysis of the situation. Kind of relates back to the presentations where the focus is more on the number or quota of women there, but not really like on are they being included enough or being equitably included. I think it would be a better word.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, with the elections, we saw an independent candidate win, and she had about 13,000 votes. So we cannot just dismiss women's role as just saying it's a quota. However, most of the women that are in the parliament solely serve, again, the patriarchal norms or what their party wants and needs from them. And it's usually the needs of men and what they want. So they're like personally, I rarely see women candidates truly advocate for women's rights and push for women's equality. And about the personal status law, I will answer your question from the bottom up. So when it comes to the personal status law, I do think that because of imperialism, I think we see a lot of push from Iran's influence into Baghdad, and then Baghdad is also reflecting that here. I would like to say that a lot of people think that the KRG is different and that the people do not want to advocate for the personal status law. They do not want it to actually get implemented, but that's further from the truth. There are a lot of conservative people who have been actively pushing for the amendments to this personal status law, and they are advocating for sort of just accepting underage marriage in society. And this is a pattern we see regularly. And I do think that it was during the time of ISIS where we did see that conservative sentiment really penetrate its way in the KRG. There has been, I would say, a good amount of people who did join ISIS from the KRG. And it really just reflects how people's mentalities are on the ground and how we really have not done much in terms of progression when it comes to, having more of a liberal mindset and secularism in the system. So yeah, I do think that the dynamic has shifted from about 10 years ago, and there is more of a conservative sentiment now. So I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Oh, did you want to say something, Simon?
Yeah, I was gonna say I was looking at the questions that were sent. So I wanted to answer one of them. Is that okay?
Of course. Yeah, maybe read it out loud just so we all on the same. Yeah.
Okay, so the question from Nima, do you believe focusing on empowering young women and girls would have a greater impact, or should we prioritize giving a platform to the women who have fought for their country but have not been given the opportunity to speak? I think, thank you so much for your question. I think this is one of the questions that interested me. On the question of whether to focus on empowering young women and girls or giving a platform to, let's say, more experienced women who have already contributed to the country's or to the region's struggle, I think it's not an either or choice. It's about finding a strategic balance. Both approaches have unique, like their own benefits and can complement each other to create a stronger and more inclusive movement. Empowering young women and girls can have a long-term impact. By investing in the next generation, it would mean equipping them with leadership skills, educational opportunities, and young women can bring fresh perspectives and new approaches to issues like gender violence, political participation, and education, while amplifying the voices of experienced women who have been on the front lines is equally crucial. I think these women have they possess the lived experiences and a deep understanding of the challenges faced within their communities. And I think their stories can inspire the younger generation and provide context that would be or often that is lost when the struggles when we're looking at the struggles of the older generation. I think having a combination of both or having more of, let's say, learning from each other would be a good way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with Sawin, and I do think that what the KRG needs is not just women's participation, but it's also proper representation of what women need and want in the region, what their true desire is, especially that they were on the front lines of war. As we know, women are always the most affected by war. Yeah, so it's really important that we also put proper representation to the specific needs that they incurred after such tragedies and not just put them as a representation or a number such as we see nowadays.
Yeah, that's such a useful reflection. We have time, I think, for 2 more questions. If you don't have any specific one you want to answer, I can read out loud, but feel free to read out yourself if you have like one you really want to answer.
Actually, Eleanor, I do. So Aksana asked what type of support systems are available for survivors of gender violence and how accessible are they for women in Kurdish communities? I think this strictly ties to our work as well. So one thing that we're currently working on with our partners in Lebanon with SMEX is we want to create a website, a digital platform that can that we could reach the resources to survivors of violence, whether it's post-conflict, whether it's gender-based violence, and we're drawing specifically from the action plan. So as we know that the KRG has issues with directly reaching women to provide the resources that they've put in place. So to answer actually the question first is that there are reparations like in terms of monetary compensation. So they do help survivors in post-conflict to get monetary help, support. With gender-based violence, it's not very clear. There has been initiatives where there's a hotline you could call to help women who are enduring violence, but it doesn't really work, again, because of the societal expectations and what they think. So it's not really implemented properly. So I think right now with our website, we actually hope to provide that outlet for gender-based violence and conflict-based violence for women to reach therapists, mental health support, physical support. A lot of those women really need medical examinations that they're not even able to afford or reach, but through online initiatives, we're able to even reach rural women, which are disproportionately harmed by both gender violence and conflict-based violence. Yes. Oh, also, and about cybersecurity and online abuse, of course, we try our best to make sure that every platform is safe and it's very secure. We make sure that we do not take the identity or any information of the people that are using the website, to make sure that there's no way that it could get back to them and it could harm them. And I think these are the measures that we have taken so far. If Sawen, if you would like to elaborate on it, then that would be wonderful.
Of course, I think for the cybersecurity and how I understood it was like addressing online abuse or harassment, because this happens with women, like so online like extortion of women that are specifically targeting women. I think this is one of the projects that we have in mind for the future. We are really interested in combining technology to find solutions, because I think in our region, accessibility is one of the things that makes it hard to reach a lot of the services. So we hope to, for example, tackle the issue of online harassment by having stronger or teaching skills of digital literacy and cybersecurity to people that are interested. I think this is in our one of our projects, and we would love to talk to anybody else who has any ideas. We love collaboration, so if you are an expert in technology or cybersecurity, please let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Great. So we only have a few minutes left. Maybe time for one last question from Hannah, if you want to speak.
I don't have a question. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your efforts. Hi, Sohin. I actually just wanted to add about like the cybersecurity question, because I've heard that there are a lot of there is a number for complaints like governmental from the governmental side, and there are some NGOs who are supposed to help women activists or just women in general who get hacked or online threats or whatever, or harassment, but there are no actions. So okay, they do they complain and they give all the information that's needed, but at the end nobody gets back to them. Or for example, some NGOs, I don't want to mention names, but they say, like, for example, you are not an activist or you are not involved in this and this and that, and they feel like she's excluded because she's not having the certain criteria. So I never heard of any complaint that was successfully accomplished by them. So
yeah, I think we are aware of this issue. So when we were thinking about current issues that are more, for example, what we can work on, what are some other issues that women are facing or other organizations are facing, we were aware of the number from the government, but I think you are definitely right. There is no follow-up, and there's no follow-through with the complaints. So thank you, Hannah, for coming here, and I thank you for the question. I think this is something that we're definitely very interested in exploring more, and maybe having more discussions together so that we can find some, maybe come up with some ideas.
Yes, definitely. I do think it's a work in progress. And hopefully through further collaborations and I think discussions, change does take time and accountability comes with it as well. So we hope that in the future we are able to tackle such issues.
Yes, thank you so much. Our time is up. Maybe I can give a brief overview of what the chat is saying, just to leave us with some open questions to think about. Yeah, like one question is about how monitors and evaluators could further consider this perspective apart from these innovative data collection methods, and as we should try to improve kind of the role we play in these processes. There's also a question that was kind of addressed in terms of like how to create partnerships without them being detrimental to the women's safety, as this can sometimes a bit backlash internally. And also, how can we bring women that maybe are very feel very closely for themselves traditional norms, and how can they, like, these experiences be mobilized for different struggles. So yeah, I guess there are a lot of questions that both of you sparked in us, and it's great. I will definitely maybe share with who attended your email, if you're both of your emails, if you're comfortable with that. You can find the link of Trust in the chat, and I will also send it in the follow-up email, so you can also reach out to us. And yeah, thank you so much for this session. It was great.
Thank you so much, Eleonora. Thank you for everybody who joined and who helped organize this. We appreciate everybody.
Yeah, thank you everyone who joined, and thank you the speaker. I hope everyone is gonna have a great day.